There's hardly anything more perfect than the ability to climb to the top of whatever dominance hierarchy you happen to be put in. Now, one of the things I would say is that women exerted tremendous selection pressure on men to be exactly that sort of creature. But what the hell else would women select men for? If they had any sense. You know, you want to select a partner, because you know, you've heard the idea of hypergamy, right? Women mate across or up dominance hierarchies. I think that women pick men for their ability to climb the status hierarchy, because we forced women in an experiment that we never published to choose between those two things, wealth versus ability. The women overwhelmingly chose ability. They just use wealth as a marker of ability.
There seems to be an employment issue too, and I mean that's a complicated problem because, you know, the employment market for people who are less skilled has been, I would say, in decline, especially on the male end of the distribution. And one of the stats that Farrell cites is that 3/4 of women will not consider seriously dating an unemployed man, whereas 1/3 of men would have a problem dating an unemployed woman. So there's obviously a gender bias there, and I think there's a reason for that. I think that it's grounded in both rationality and evolutionary biology. The evolutionary biology element is that women across cultures tend to mate across and up hierarchies, let's say. And the reason for that, I think, is that they're logically, and this is where the logic comes in as well as the biology, they're looking for a partner that can be of substantial economic utility, practical utility, when they put themselves in the vulnerable position of having a child. Mm-hmm. So then you also have this additional problem is if the employment situation tanks in any serious way, then men become less desirable as partners. And your claim, I guess, in part is that by filling that void, the government actually contributes to the problem rather than address it.
I mean, we know that human beings can, hypothetically, can look at an array of middle-aged men and pick out the CEOs without knowing them. They can do it at better than chance. Now, they're not exactly sure what cues are being used, or maybe they are, and I just don't know the literature well enough. That might be part of it. So we do pick up cues of dominance that are, I think they're innate. Wide jaw is one of them. You know, and there's weird variations on this too. So I can tell you, for example, if you show women pictures of the same man and you vary the jaw width, when the women are ovulating, they like the guy with the thick jaw, the heavy jaw, and when they're not, when they're completely opposite to ovulating, they like the guy with the thinner jaw. And so, I mean, I think this is part of the reason that women have trouble with men, actually, because I think that from a sexual perspective, they might be more wired to be attractive to men who produce monstrous sons, but, you know, like powerful, attractive sons, because from an evolutionary perspective, you're much more likely to get a grandchild, or to speak in a more Darwinian sense, you're more likely to pass on your genes if you have a son who's successful at attracting mates. And there's no reason to assume that the man who will produce sons that's more capable of attracting mates is going to be the sort of man, A, that will treat you right, or B, won't fool around. Because basically you're gambling in some sense that your son will have the opportunity to fool around, because that's your best bet in terms of moving your genetic material forward. Testosterone. Yes, it's teeth. We bite. So a heavy, more muscular jaw, like people don't anymore, but chimpanzees certainly bite, is one of the markers, actually. Yeah. So these are, you know, I wouldn't say they're overwhelmingly powerful effects, but they're detectable, you know. So, and it also goes along, I think, with some things like preference for symmetry, because, you know, there's a higher probability that an asymmetrical person has had something go wrong with them at some point in their biological development. So people find symmetrical people more attractive. And that's the truth even for creatures like butterflies. So there are butterflies that will not mate with another butterfly, even if they're asymmetrical by almost an unmeasurable amount. So they're very, very attuned to it. People who run things are sitting at home smoking big cigars and like telling their minions what to do. It's like, that's like the 1920s millionaire that's on the cover of the Monopoly game. That's no sociological analysis. I know lots of people like that, and they work all the time. all the time, from the second they wake up till the second they go to sleep. And they don't just casually work. So these people who are running things, there's corrupt people obviously, but the vast majority of them first are self-made and second, they're so bloody efficient and smart, you cannot believe it. And they work 80 hours a week. And most of them happen to be men. And why is that? Because there are a small number of insane men who will do nothing but work 80 hours a week. And no matter where you put them, if you put them in the middle of a forest with an axe, all they would do is run around chopping down trees. So the issue isn't why aren't there more women in positions of power? It's why are there any men insane enough ever to occupy those positions? You know, because we also know, and the data on this is very clear, what's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for cross-culturally. 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So their husbands already make $350,000 a year. It's like they think, well, I don't need much more money. The men use money to keep track of the competition, by the way, because all the male lawyers that I talk to are usually real hard-ass guys, really low in agreeableness, really high in conscientiousness, like conservative types, low in openness as well, and they want to win. So there's a real brass knuckles competition that drives these sorts of things. But we get things backwards so often in psychology and in sociology. It's not why there aren't more women in positions of power. It's why do any men want those positions? You just have no idea the amount of responsibility that comes along with that. You just imagine for a minute trying to run $1 billion corporation. You can't even bloody well balance your checkbook, and there's dust bunnies underneath your bed. How in the world would you ever run $1 billion corporation? Those things are complicated, and you have enemies, and they're trying to take you out all the time. You look at Apple and Samsung, man, they're just torturing each other in the courts nonstop. You know, if you're running a big corporation, you'll be handling 200 or 300 lawsuits at a time. And that's just nothing compared to the complexity of what you actually have to do. Stay on top of the technology, constantly interact with your large customers, travel all the time because you have to maintain the relationships. You have to regulate the politics inside the business. Believe me, it's no picnic. And you think, well, they get a lot of money. It's like, what makes you think that's such a good thing?